simply couldn't trust my own eyes. Johnny, my wife, with whom I had spent 7 years, was sitting at a table in the dining car with her colleague Jim. They were passionately engrossed in each other. I looked around, hoping to see a conductor or a waiter, but strangely enough, no one was nearby. At that moment, any love I felt for my wife died, definitively. This trip was supposed to have been a pleasant journey, an opportunity for both of us to restore our former intimacy. I was surprised when she told me that Jim, her colleague, would also be there. She insisted that he was our mutual friend, but honestly, I had never liked that man. Back then, I couldn't find a single reason why he would want to come with us, but now everything became completely clear. I also realized that I would need solid evidence for the divorce proceedings. Our relationship was over. Of course, the sight of their togetherness right there on the table aroused a certain excitement in me, but I was not willing to accept such blatant disrespect. I took out my phone and began recording their rendezvous on video. I had no desire to hear their conversations or watch them, but the recording continued. It seemed as if their intimate scene on the table would last an eternity. Amazing how rough Jim was with her, and she even seemed to like it. Maybe I should have been rougher too, but that's just not in my nature. Finally, they stopped. Johnny straightened her dress and handed her lover her panties, the new sexy lingerie I had assumed she bought for me. He grinned and held it to his face to inhale her scent. "We need to be more careful," she whispered as they took their seats. "If George finds out about us, he'll be furious." "Forget that weakling," Jim replied contemptuously. "We've been together for a year, and he hasn't suspected a thing." I froze. So this had been going on for 12 months? I knew there had been tensions between us lately because of my busy schedule, but damn it, it was my work that put a roof over our heads. Johnny worked too, but her income was just enough for her own needs: clothes, accessories, visits to beauty salons, and so on. The idea of taking a few days off to travel by train, enjoy the scenery, and spend time in each other's arms came from me. Jim asked her if she would let me clean up behind her when they got back, calling it funny. Then he asked if she had done what they had agreed regarding contraception. Johnny nodded affirmatively. "Yes, I stopped taking the pills so you can get me pregnant. And I told George that I have my period, so he won't expect any intimacy this week." Both laughed cheerfully. "Why are you still with him then?" Jim asked. "You obviously don't love him. Otherwise, you wouldn't do something like this." She replied that she didn't love me at all, that she did like me, but the former passion was gone. Besides, I brought home good money, and she couldn't live on her salary. She admitted that she could never afford the conditions on this trip that I had paid for. When Jim asked about their next meeting, she suggested meeting late at night when I would be asleep. What I had heard and seen was enough. I ended the recording and went to our sleeping car to think about the next steps. The divorce was a done deal, but I wanted them both to pay for what they had done. I called my lawyer, Fred Juergens. "Fred, it's George. I need you to prepare the divorce papers. I insist on strict enforcement of the prenuptial agreement." The lawyer asked if I was sure of my decision. I replied that I had never been more sure. The grounds for divorce were infidelity, and I had the video as proof. Fred promised to prepare everything in no time. I asked him to serve her the notice directly at the train station in Springfield in 2 days. I also instructed him to gather information about her lover, Jim Simpson. Fred reminded me, as always, not to do anything stupid, which made me smile. After finishing the call, I sent the video to the lawyer and thought. I took out my tablet, connected it to my phone, and logged into our home network via a secure connection. First, I closed the joint bank accounts and transferred the funds to avoid any risk, despite the prenup. Then another idea came to me. Johnny often used the home computer for her private correspondence and never cared about security. I could easily log into her email account. I composed an email trying to imitate her writing style. In the subject line, I wrote, "Look how much fun I'm having on the trip." In the message itself, I wrote, "Look what I'm doing while my clumsy husband sleeps." I attached the aforementioned video to the email and sent it to her entire contact list: friends, relatives, and colleagues. After reviewing the result, I pressed send. When I came out of the compartment, I saw one of the conductors and called him over. I informed him that my wife would like to move to another compartment and asked where Jim Simpson's seat was. The employee looked at his tablet and was surprised, as it was economy class, which was significantly inferior to our luxury compartment. I replied, "That's life." We quickly packed her things, without much care for the integrity of her clothes, and brought them to Jim's cramped cabin. I grinned as I threw her belongings onto the narrow bed. The conductor prepared a new key card for her and asked where she was. We walked through the entire train and entered the dining car. Johnny and Jim were still swooning. I sat down at their table, and the conductor addressed my wife. She looked annoyed, but he politely informed her that there had been a mistake in the seat allocation and handed her a new key, taking the old one back. The conductor behaved impeccably calmly. When he left, Johnny asked angrily what I was doing. "I'm just making it easier for you and Jim," I replied. Her eyes widened in horror. She tried to pretend she didn't know what I was talking about, but I asked her directly if she really thought I didn't know about her affair. Jim, noticing the compartment number on the new key, realized that she would now have to live in his room. I confirmed, "I thought that would be more convenient for you, and you wouldn't have to use the dining table. By the way, Johnny, did you tell him about the prenuptial agreement you signed before the wedding?" Jim got nervous and started making excuses, claiming it was just a joke and they hadn't meant anything bad. Johnny agreed, saying that this wouldn't affect our marriage. In response, I took out my tablet and played the recording at the point where they were talking about money. From the speakers, her voice rang out clearly. "I don't love him anymore, but he brings home a good salary and I wouldn't survive on my money." I stopped the video and looked at her. "So I'm just a walking wallet to you, darling?" She tried to say something beginning with honey, but I cut her off sharply. "Don't ever call me that again. I don't think you should address me by my first name either. From now on, speak to me only as Mr. Duvalier. Since you no longer feel bound to me by marriage, I'll take this upon myself." With these words, I removed her engagement ring and wedding ring from her fingers. Then I grabbed her purse and detached the key to our house from the large key ring she had it on. I also took off my own wedding ring and placed it right in front of Jim, remarking that I wouldn't be needing it anymore. I turned to Jim and explained the situation. The prenuptial agreement Johnny signed clearly states, in the event of adultery, the guilty party, in this case, her, gets absolutely nothing. I will allow her to take her clothes and personal jewelry, but that's all. I doubt she'll be able to afford the payments on her car herself. Fortunately, I had all the documents put in her name, so her credit rating will be affected. "You bastard!" he shouted, trying to stand up. I immediately grabbed a fork and made a motion as if I were going to nail his hand to the table. He sat back down immediately. I warned him not to even try to mess with me. "Please," Johnny whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Joe, Mr. Duvalier, I beg you, don't do this. I've seen the error of my ways. Can't you really forgive me so we can put this behind us?" "No, faithless wife," I cut her off. I rewound the video to the point where they were discussing the plan for Johnny to get pregnant. I turned the volume to full so they could both clearly hear their own words. "You did this behind my back for a year. You planned for Johnny to conceive Jim's child and then pass it off as my heir." I looked at her with undisguised disgust and admitted that I now hated her from the bottom of my heart and cursed the day I first laid eyes on her. Then I turned my gaze to Jim. "You wanted a lying, despicable woman? Well, she's yours. Good luck. I suspect she won't be getting any support from her family and friends now." "What do you mean by that?" Johnny asked with a trembling voice. I just shrugged and advised her to check her emails. She took out her phone and opened the app. Her eyes widened in horror. "What have you done?" she gasped. I replied that I had simply shared her vivid memories with her own relatives and acquaintances. "You had so much fun in the video that I thought it necessary to show it to the others." "You beast!" she hissed. "My parents have just disowned me. My sister declared that she never wants to see me again. My friends think I'm a cheap adulteress, and now everyone hates me." I calmly asked if she could blame them. I gave her the 7 best years of my life. The entire time I loved only her, never even thought about other women. I worked myself to exhaustion to buy the big house she had dreamed of and the brand new BMW. I never complained when she spent all the money only on herself or when she supposedly went to meet girlfriends. And what did I get in return? She tore out my heart, trampled on our marriage, and betrayed me. That's why I don't blame her relatives one bit for their reaction. She began to beg for a second chance, but I shook my head. She could have stopped at any time, but chose to continue the lie. This is the end of the line. She made her bed and now she has to sleep in it. I expressed the hope that it had been worth it. When our train arrives in Springfield, the divorce papers will be served to her. She just has to sign them. After that, she and Jim can bore each other to death. I don't care. Mr. Duvalier, is there anything I can do to make amends? I'm ready for anything, she said. I stood up and thought for a moment. Yes, there is one thing. More precisely, even two. Hope flared in her eyes. I looked at her and advised her to go to hell and disappear from my life quickly. She burst into tears, and I turned around and left. On the way to my compartment, I had trouble holding back tears. As soon as I locked myself in, my phone rang. It was her parents. Apparently, they had already seen the video. "George, what the hell is going on?" asked Cliff, Johnny's father. "Hello, Cliff. I caught your daughter cheating with another man. I recorded it on video and sent it to you. I am filing for divorce based on the prenuptial agreement. The papers will be served to her as soon as the train arrives in Springfield. I wanted you to know the real reason for our separation. Isn't there any way to overlook this? Divorce is so radical," he said. I said no. If he had listened carefully to what his daughter and her lover had talked about, he would understand that something like that is impossible to forgive. To her, I was just a source of money, an ATM. She even planned to have me raise another man's child. Foolish girl, Cliff sighed. I mentioned that I had heard they had disowned her. Cliff clarified that he had simply asked her to give him even one valid reason why he shouldn't do that, and that he was still waiting for an answer. He added that he was now glad that I had insisted on signing the prenup before the wedding. Maybe things hadn't turned out as we had planned, but I had done him a great service by opening his eyes. "I'm very sorry, George. You're right. Over time, I grew to love you like a son I never had," he said. I replied that I valued him very much as well. Cliff asked if he could help in any way. I asked if they still had a spare key to my house. After receiving an affirmative answer, I asked him to rent a truck and remove all of Johnny's belongings. I didn't plan to return to town for a few days, and I absolutely did not want to see her in my house. I promised to reimburse the moving costs in full. "Of course we'll do that," Cliff agreed. "What about her car?" I said they could take that too, although I wasn't sure how long she could afford it. Maybe he should teach his daughter how to manage money or help her trade in the BMW for something more affordable. Cliff expressed his condolences again, to which I replied that he bore no blame for what had happened. We said goodbye and ended the call. I had barely put my phone away when it rang again. It was Lisa, Johnny's cousin. "What do you want, Lisa?" I asked as I answered the call. "So you finally found out everything about Johnny?" she asked. I confirmed that. She asked if I was going to divorce that good-for-nothing woman. I replied that the process was already underway. "That's good," Lisa said. "You know, I've always really liked you." Frankly, I found Lisa damn attractive too, but as long as I was married to her cousin, she was off limits to me. I paid her a compliment and remarked that she was also quite a hot number. Lisa liked to wear short skirts and tight shorts in my presence, and it always fueled my imagination. "Oh, so you did notice," she said coquettishly. Then she asked directly if we could get together now that I had kicked the adulteress out. I replied that this might happen once the divorce was officially finalized. Lisa said she understood. She had waited 7 years, so she would wait a few more months. And then she promised to give me such pleasure as I had never known. When the call ended, I felt very aroused. Maybe something good would come out of this whole nasty affair after all. The next 2 days passed rather quickly. I spent almost all my time on the phone, rarely leaving my compartment to avoid running into that pair of traitors. Fred told me what I had already suspected. Jim Simpson was a known womanizer who had been divorced twice because of his affairs. His last wife had even sued him for domestic violence. I understood that sooner or later, Johnny would be drawn to someone like that. But deep down, I hoped she would come to her senses and leave him. Shortly before the train arrived in Springfield, there was a knock on my door. "Who is it?" I asked through the closed door. "It's me, Johnny," her voice sounded. "What do you want?" "I want my husband back," she sobbed. "That's not going to happen, you adulteress," I cut her off. "I need a faithful and devoted wife who loves me. But I didn't get that, did I?" "Please, Mr. Duvalier, I made a mistake," she cried. I replied that she had made far more than a simple mistake and ordered her to disappear before I called security, reminding her that her place was now in economy class. She only begged me for a conversation, but I remained adamant. I declared that I never wanted to see her again. I heard her sobbing as she walked away. Part of me felt sorry for her, but by and large I didn't care. She had brought this misfortune upon herself through her lies, her betrayal, and her lack of respect. As I got off the train, I looked around for her and Jim. I noticed them a few cars away. Both looked extremely unhappy. "Serves you right," I thought to myself. At that moment, a man approached Johnny and handed her a thick envelope. She opened it and immediately collapsed, sobbing onto the ground. I smiled and walked away. I got into my car and drove home. When I arrived, I noticed that Johnny's car wasn't there, and all her things had been removed, including the furniture she had had before our wedding. I unpacked my bags and searched the entire house, taking down all the photos showing her from the walls and shelves. I didn't want anything that reminded me of that woman. A few hours later, there was a knock on the door. When I looked out the window, I saw Lisa. God, how stunning she looked in those short shorts. I opened the door and let her in. In her hands, she carried a large dish from which a delicious aroma of lasagna wafted. She entered with an expression as if she were already the lady of the house and placed the food on the kitchen table. When she turned to me, I studied her closely. "I wanted to make sure you didn't go hungry," she said. "Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that," I replied. Her eyes sparkled as she smiled. I suggested she stay and have dinner with me. She happily agreed and sent me off to wash up, saying she would take care of everything. I quickly went upstairs, freshened up, and came back to the kitchen. By then, the table was already set, and Lisa had even poured wine into the glasses. I pulled out her chair for her and admired her slender legs as she sat down. She put a huge piece of lasagna on my plate, full of meat and stringy cheese. I thought she must have really made an effort. When she took a small portion for herself, I looked at her and said the dish looked stunning. She thanked me and added that she loved to cook, especially for those who truly meant something to her. The lasagna tasted as good as it looked. I ate every last bite, even wiping the plate clean with a slice of the garlic bread she had made. "You must have been really hungry," she remarked. I replied that I simply couldn't leave such deliciousness on the plate and admitted that this was the best lasagna of my life. Lisa came over to me, sat down on my lap, and smiled contentedly. She said she had much more in store, and maybe someday she would even bring me dessert. Then she added that she had to go home to feed her cat, but promised to come by tomorrow for sure. "I can hardly wait," I said then. She just smiled mysteriously as she stood up. That was just a preview of what she had in store for me in the future. I could only wait for the moment when my divorce would be officially finalized. I really hoped Johnny wouldn't cause a scene and drag out the process. Before Lisa left, we kissed for a long time. To my relief, Johnny did not contest the dissolution of the marriage. Apparently, she understood that I had cornered her with irrefutable evidence and decided that resistance was futile. The two of them had managed to keep their jobs, but from what I had heard, they had narrowly escaped disaster. My ex-wife signed all the necessary papers and called me to apologize. She confirmed that the matter was settled. Soon after, Fred called with the news. The signed documents had been officially registered. In 30 days, I would be an absolutely free man. Did I feel happy at that moment? On one hand, I was sincerely glad to be rid of the woman who had cheated on me. On the other hand, a strange feeling of emptiness had settled in my soul. I had loved that woman for many years, was faithful to her, and had sincerely hoped to grow old with her, surrounded by children and grandchildren. But it was not to be. I also couldn't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction that Jim had received no punishment. I seriously considered suing for alienation of affection, but Fred convinced me that would just be a waste of time. Thoughts of beating him nearly to death also crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed them. I had no desire to spend time in jail. Lisa came over every evening. She always brought something delicious she had cooked herself, and we ate together. She even kept a special calendar where she marked the days remaining until my marriage was finally dissolved. Lisa was a tireless seductress. She even gave me several CDs filled with her personal photos and home videos. Finally, the 30 days were over. I received all the official documents. I was surprised that there was no reaction from Johnny. I had expected her to call or do something stupid, but the house was silent. On that memorable day, Lisa didn't wait for my call. She came on her own and knocked on the door. That seemed strange to me because I had long given her a house key and told her she could come anytime. When I opened the door, I was literally speechless. Lisa was standing on the porch completely naked. I immediately led her inside and began kissing her greedily, touching her smooth skin. She returned my passion just as intensely, ripping my clothes off in the process. Finally, we ended up on the sofa. As I held her, I realized that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this woman. She seemed to think the same. Lisa turned on her side and looked intently into my eyes. She confessed that she had always loved me and promised that she would never do to me what her foolish cousin had done. She wanted to spend her entire life by my side. "Does that mean you'll marry me?" I asked. Lisa smiled and hugged me tightly, whispering that she agreed and would make me the happiest man on the planet. We kissed again and made love until we fell asleep in each other's arms. A few days later, Johnny's father called. Lisa and I had just finished our quiet time and were lying in bed, watching a movie and eating popcorn. "George, Johnny is in the hospital," he said. I sat up immediately, seized by fear. It turned out that the man she was living with had beaten her nearly to death. Her father urged her to go to the police, but she strictly refused. I asked if she would recover. Cliff replied that she would recover physically, but if she stayed with that bastard, it wouldn't last. We decided to go to the hospital right away. Cliff was surprised to learn that Lisa was with me, but I confirmed that I had needed her help to get through all this. After the call, I explained the situation to Lisa and told her what I had found out about Jim Simpson. We were both disappointed by Johnny's behavior, but neither of us wished her physical harm. We got ready quickly and drove to the clinic. A nurse led us to the room. Johnny looked terrible. Her face was a single black and blue bruise. One eye was completely swollen shut. One arm was in a cast and a tube from an IV hung from the other. When we entered, she let out a soft moan. I would have liked to hug her and say everything would be okay, but I suppressed that impulse. "Mr. Duvalier," she whispered, and a tear rolled down her cheek. I raised my hand to silence her and said she could simply call me George. She told me that Jim wanted to take her car to go on a date with another woman. When she refused, he flew into a rage and started beating her while screaming insults. Johnny tried to reason with him, reminding him that it was her car and she paid the bills herself, but he wouldn't stop. The beating only ended when she threatened to call an ambulance. Jim disappeared in an unknown direction. She was having trouble breathing because of the severe pain in her chest, so she called the doctors herself. Lisa asked if she had told the police the truth. Johnny admitted that she was too scared. She feared that if he was put in prison and then got out, he would kill her. I just shook my head hearing this nonsense. The situation was absurd. She had left me for a man who was now cheating on her and crippling her. She sobbed, admitting that she had made a disastrous mistake. Lisa hugged her cousin to comfort her. At that moment, Johnny noticed the diamond ring on Lisa's finger. When she learned of our engagement, she sobbed even harder, soaking Lisa's t-shirt with her tears. Lisa said that she still loved her, even though she thought what she had done to me was extremely stupid. Johnny's parents entered the room. When Cliff learned the details of what had happened, he flew into an indescribable rage. He promised his daughter that they would be there for her and that they would take her to their home after her discharge until she regained her strength. Then he gestured for me to come into the hallway. Cliff asked me about Simpson. I gave him all the information I had gotten from Fred. He listened attentively and nodded, seemingly devising a plan. When he learned that Jim worked at the same company as Johnny, he promised to take care of that bastard personally. He didn't go into detail, only saying that it was better if I didn't know anything. Then we talked about Lisa. I confirmed that she had helped me through the divorce and that we were now engaged. Cliff smiled. It turned out he had always known that Lisa was fond of me. He congratulated me and was glad that I was staying in the family. I offered my help in the matter with Simpson, but he categorically refused. Cliff aptly remarked that I was about to get married and that Lisa absolutely did not need her husband to end up in jail. When I returned to the room, I saw that Johnny's mother was going to stay the night with her. Cliff, on the other hand, decided to take care of transporting his daughter's belongings from that bastard's apartment. Johnny looked at me with pleading eyes and asked for forgiveness for everything she had done. I was silent for a moment, then replied that I forgave her. After all, we were still a family. I went over to her, hugged her goodbye, and gave her a light kiss on the forehead, wishing her a speedy recovery. Lisa and I drove home. I had no idea what Cliff was planning exactly, but I had heard stories about his time in the military. He had connections in various circles. For the entire following week, I closely followed the local news and even scanned the obituaries. Nothing was there, but soon a short article appeared in the newspaper. It was about a man who had been attacked and brutally beaten near a bar. The victim was Jim Simpson. A group of unknown assailants broke 3 of his ribs, his jaw, his kneecap, and one arm. The article also mentioned severe injuries to his genitals. When I read that, I had to laugh. Cliff picked up Johnny's belongings and brought them to his house. Her parents condemned her behavior, but she remained their daughter, and they continued to love her. A few months later, Lisa and I got married. Since her parents had died in a car accident many years ago, Cliff proudly walked her down the aisle. Johnny was also among the guests, crying when the priest pronounced us husband and wife. Our honeymoon in Las Vegas was simply wonderful. Lisa was incredibly passionate. After returning, she brought all her things into my house. She decided to quit her job, as my earnings were more than enough for both of us. When I asked about her new job, she replied with a sly smile that her main task now was to make me happy, and she excelled at it. One day, a few months later, Lisa greeted me after work with a sentence that every man fears: "We need to talk." I got scared, expecting something bad, but she just smiled and said we needed to start renovating one of the bedrooms. When I asked why, she replied that I was going to be a father. I almost jumped for joy. I took her in my arms and covered her with kisses. Lisa asked if I was happy. I replied that I was the happiest person in the entire universe. She suggested going upstairs and putting it into practice. Yes, sometimes life throws you lemons, but sometimes it gives you something much more beautiful in return.